Okay, super excited about today's meeting. We're going to spend a lot of time learning about, refreshing our memories about the organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Before we go there though, so how the meeting is going to be structured is we're going to do an icebreaker, break you all up into groups of 4, ask you to introduce yourselves, what city you live in, and then also the way that you like being seen, that you prefer being seen. And then we're going to come back. I'll run through our presentation about how SVBC has been centering diversity, equity, and inclusion in its work. We're then going to break up into groups again of 4, and we'll have some question prompts for you all to be considering and talking about. And then we'll come back and have just a real quick debrief for about 5 minutes. Before we do, I actually wanted to take a moment to celebrate a recent win. And I know Diana's on the line and Ari's on the line, but it's super important for us to be recognizing and celebrating when our local teams do something special. So I wanted to bump it over to Ari in just like 30 seconds. What was the accomplishment recently in the city of Sunnyvale?
Hi, so on Tasman Drive between Fair Oaks and Lawrence Expressway, there's previously was no sidewalk, no bike lane, it's just 2 car traffic lanes in each direction. Last year, we got a temporary lane closure done to create space for walking and biking. And a couple weeks ago, we just got that extended for another year.
Yay, that is super awesome. Anyway, that's really wonderful, and this is such a great example of the local teams and you all coming together to accomplish something in your city. So thank you, Ari. You have been like a shining example of what leadership of a local team looks like.
Ari!
Yeah,
Thank you, guys.
All right, and I know Sandhya, did you want to also mention there was a local team that had a win on the peninsula, and I'm not remembering. I know you said it in passing.
Yes, the city of San Mateo had been pushing for getting lead pedestrian intervals installed at intersections along El Camino, and they just got them installed at about 4 intersections on El Camino in the city of San Mateo. So that's a huge win for the city of San Mateo too.
Yay! Yeah. All right, we're gonna have all bike bells, cowbells. Eris is like covering her ears. She's like,
everything goes directly into my hearing aids, and so the bells are challenging.
Not good for you. All right, got it. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of an icebreaker before we get started. We're going to break you all up into groups of 4. I'm talking slowly to make sure our staff has an opportunity to get that all done before we break up. But the prompt is say your name, what city you live in, and then the way that you really like people to see you, how you identify first and foremost. Does that make sense? And if that's constraining, you can do whatever, you can introduce yourself in whatever way you want. We will have 5 minutes to do this, and then we'll pull you back into this main room. Are we ready to go? All right, go.
There we go.
All right. Let's see, I think everybody's getting sucked back into the main room. Hopefully you all had a good time getting to know each other. So I'm just gonna go ahead and launch in, starting with what oftentimes scares me, and that's sharing my screen, because I'm always afraid there's gonna be some sort of glitch in the technology. So let's see, can you all see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Yay.
Yep.
Okay, so again, I am Shiloh and I work for the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. Tonight, we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion at SVBC and the bike movement. And I want to start first and foremost by thanking you all for being here. You, the supporters and members of SVBC, are the engine. You're who we rely on. You're the power of the organization. And so we really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to be here and learn with us how we can make the bike movement much more strong or stronger. I also just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we're talking about what can be a really sensitive topic. And so I just have some bullets here. I won't go through them all, but I'll just say, you know, as we go into our breakouts and even in this big room, as people are making comments, you know, just listen with an open mind, with a child's mind, with cultural humility, you know, give people a lot of grace, assume good intent. If I say something that is offensive, you know, please, you know, feel free to call me out in the chat, whatever way you're comfortable. I'm fine with that. I usually, if I get defensive about something, I usually think of it as a signal to myself as something I should dive a little more deeper into. So anyway, reminders for all of us, and I will just get started. So why is it that we are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the bike movement? And so to answer that question, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish? So Sandhya, hey, help me out here. What is the mission of the Bike Coalition?
Our mission is to create a healthy community, environment, and economy through bicycling for all those who live in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties.
Exactly. And more specifically, we have a numerical goal, and that is that we want to have 10% of trips be taken by bike by 2025. That's the goal. And you probably asked, well, how are we doing in getting to that goal? Sadly, we're only at about 1.5%, which is not so great. And so we have to ask ourselves, why is that? And we can answer that question in a whole lot of ways. But one of the ways is for us to understand who is riding a bike, who isn't, and why is that? So here are some quick statistics that were done out of our public opinion research that we did pre-pandemic in partnership with the Mineta Transportation Institute. 70%, I need to remember to, gotta remind me to change the slides. So 70% of more men ride than women. Only 29% of Latino, Latina, and Latinx, those of Latino, Latina, and Latinx origin own a bike. So those are just a few statistics, but you can say that there's a pretty simple answer to the question of why we should care about it. And that is that we're never going to achieve our goal of 10% if the vast majority of folks attracted to biking are of only one demographic, and mainly men. And I may say the word men at times during this presentation. Please know I am not attacking men. I love men. I live with a man. They are wonderful. What are we doing or not doing that makes riding a bike for everyday use attractive to lots more folks? And what specifically are we doing as an advocacy organization to make sure that we understand the reasons different demographics are attracted to riding a bike? To answer this question, it's really fun to look at who's actually on this call. Who's here? Who is here in the bike movement leading the advocacy of SVBC, and are we representative of Silicon Valley? We know, for example, that lots of poor people depend on the bike to get around. Are there poor people involved in our local teams? If not, are we doing a good job speaking on behalf of those, of the people who are not in the room? And can we even speak well on behalf of folks whose perspectives aren't represented here? So essentially, you all, the local teams, are really, really important in SVBC's ability to accurately advocate for the types of programs and infrastructure that's going to help us achieve that 10% goal. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we doing a good job getting the right folks around this table and educating ourselves well enough about the needs of all the different types of people so that we can achieve our goals? So many of you are probably like, all right, but how does this actually manifest itself in SVBC's work or the work of the bike movement? And so I want to go through a few examples, starting with, I'm sure some of you have heard this saying, just take the lane. And I want to explore that a little more because back in the day, the bike movement was dominated mostly by dudes in spandex who were quite comfortable on a bike. And they had no problem taking the lane. Maybe not no problem, I'm probably exaggerating there, but advising others, you know, just take the lane. The problem is, or one of the problems is, if you tell a woman, for example, to take the lane, it's a bit off-putting. And that's because, you know, women tend to view safety differently. If the statistics, again, that was our public opinion research done in partnership with the Medetta Transportation Institute out of San Jose State University. You'll see that when you ask the question, on what kind of bike infrastructure do you feel most comfortable, women across the board feel less safe than men, even when we're talking about a street where cars are going 25 miles an hour with a simple bike lane. And you know, only 27% of women compared to 44% of men feel safe. So my point is, in the past, the bike advocacy movement was led by expert cyclists, and it's great that we're now building on the work that they did. They laid the foundation to make this a thing, and that's wonderful. But those expert bicyclists didn't feel as unsafe as women on the roads, and as a result, we hadn't previously prioritized the kind of infrastructure that might draw women into riding bikes. And while I'm overgeneralizing a bit, and there are many more reasons why women don't ride as much as men, it's important to recognize that we haven't necessarily helped the movement when we only have one demographic involved, or a limited demographic that's doing advocacy on behalf of a lot of folks who would like to be riding bikes. Fortunately, we now have programs tailored towards women. We have bike fix-it classes for women, rides for women, all in an effort to get more women riding in the ways that will ultimately be appealing. And so we've moved to take the lane, and instead, we're working on making the lane more inviting and safe for her. I want to pause there and just ask if anyone has any thoughts about this first example that I raised. And I know on Zoom it can be awkward, but if you just wanted to make a comment or ask a question, we're also going to save some time at the end for questions. I'll wait about 10 seconds.
So, and I just put it in the comments there, and I just made this comment to Ari when we were biking on the ride on Sunday from Mountain View to Sunnyvale and Evelyn, and investigating the intersections that could be improved, or the new bike lane that could be put in. Something that occurred to me, being a cyclist who tends to go out and hammer on the roads and race the cars between intersections and very easily takes the lane. Slowing down and deliberately looking at the danger and the need for improvements on the road and those intersections, it occurred to me how blind I am to the danger or the insecurity other cyclists may feel. And so I realized that people like me need to, like I said, stick ourselves in the shoes of other cyclists to encourage them to be more involved, but also encourage them to help them understand that we're all working on this together to make it safer for everybody. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. That's a wonderful comment. Really appreciate that. Sonia, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your opinion on. I think about this topic a lot, and I'm really glad you're talking about it. I think, as a general, people who identify as women also skew higher on the so the personality traits, agreeability versus disagreeability, comfort being in the way, or comfort feeling like they're in the way, or so it's part safety, but it's also, I don't know if this is totally off topic, but it's this combination of feeling even slightly unsafe, but very burdensome or in the way. It's just something I wanted to put out there. There are more, obviously more components, and that one I think about a lot too. Thank you.
No, that's a great example too. You know, taking the lane, if I understand what you're saying, and I think I do, because this is how I feel as a woman. Taking the lane not only feels unsafe, but you feel like you are imposing upon people by putting yourself in their path, and you're like, you don't want to be a burden, you don't want to block traffic, you don't feel.
And even if, yes, and even if I don't feel that way, the awareness, the theory of mind component of feeling like someone, it's a little, you know, crazy making, but yes, it's this feeling that they think that too, right? It's even more convoluted, which I'm not proud of, but that's who I am.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great point. All right, I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna try to move on. There we go.
I had my hand up. I don't know if you.
Go ahead, Eris. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's just blending into the background there.
Okay, I see that. I'll have to change the color of my. A couple of other related things I have seen. So there's perceptions of safety, and then there is like, how do you, count numbers and define safety? I've seen some research that women are on bikes or harassed by men, by drivers, by people driving in cars more than men are, including being buzzed, passed more closely. So it's not just perception of safety. There's actual, we're treated differently on the road. Another thing that I hear from a lot from folks in our women's group, the women's riding group, and when we've done women's, bike repair clinics, is the mansplaining. That the women are like, I'm so happy to come here and learn how to fix my bike from other women because, my husband, my brother, the other guys on the ride want to tell me how to do everything or do it for me and not believe that I know how to do it because I'm a woman. And then just one other thing that I'll point out, and this is not so much about biking, but this is something I've been noticing. It's already happened here, and I've been seeing it consistently in Zoom calls. Women use the raise their hand feature and then just blurt out. So more verbal space gets taken up by the folks who, feel more agency and ability to take up space.
Thanks, Eris. I think these are all great points and all things for us to be aware of as we're working with each other. You said something that I wanted to comment on, but now I'm not remembering what it was. It may come back to me, but okay, I'm gonna move on. So next example I wanted to use is, so the second example I want to highlight is one that results in the bike movement being distrusted by people of color for being insensitive and out of touch. And in fact, just this morning, I gave a presentation to a group of majority Black folks as a part of the City of San Jose's reimagining public safety process. And the comments in the chat were, why should we listen to these privileged folks who don't understand our experience? And so, again, back to why this issue is important. If we in the bike movement are viewed this way, our ability to achieve that 10% goal will remain out of reach. I want to talk about a specific here, and that is about Vision Zero. And as a refresher, for those of you who don't know what Vision Zero is, Emma, can you tell folks what Vision Zero is?
Yeah, so Vision Zero is the goal to have 0 fatalities and major injuries on our roads.
Excellent. So San Jose, as an example, adopted Vision Zero in 2016 and started the process by collecting data on where the problem roads were. What they found was the vast majority of deaths and major injuries occurred on corridors that were in Black and brown communities on the east side, and that the vast majority of those crashes really too fast. So that's good information, right? We collected the data and we found where the problem areas are and we know why, and it's speeding and we know how to solve that. You just get more police out ticketing people. problem solved, except that a solution that over polices Black and brown communities leads to other problems. And we know in the city of San Jose, based on their own statistics, that Black and brown folks are disproportionately pulled over for traffic infractions. And we also know that Black and brown folks are treated differently in the criminal justice system. And I want to top all this off by saying that traffic enforcement is the leading cause of use of force incidents for the San Jose Police Department. So you put all this together and the solution, hey, we should just send in more police to the east side to make these streets safe, doesn't really resonate well for the folks who are the target of this. So what do? The streets are not safe. We as bicyclists, all of us have close calls every day. So we, this is serious. We need the streets to be safe. And that is why we at SVBC, we focus on street design and infrastructure as a solution to street safety. And I'm not saying that traffic enforcement should be abandoned completely. And it's different, like rec riders and urban riders. But we know that narrow lanes force people to drive more slowly. And we know that improved lighting prevents pedestrian deaths. And we know that sharper corners prevent people from flying around those turns at high speeds and forces them to pay attention and look around. So, we should look at striping our roads differently before implementing solutions that lead to some of the highest rates of incarceration and harm to Black and brown communities. I again wanted to stop there and ask if folks have any questions or wanted to comment on that specific example. And it looks like David raised his hand.
Yes, thank you. The issue of enforcement came before the policy committee in the form of, should we support a law that, as a pilot program, does video ticketing for speeding? And this question came up because it absolutely takes away the discretion that the officers might have based on race or color to issue tickets, and would avoid the problem with police enforcing these speed limits. It also would be faster, way faster and cheaper to put up these types of speed solutions than street infrastructure. The pilot program was some law that didn't make it. And I think perhaps trying to get that law passed again with equity in mind would be a really great thing, because you could target the streets that need it and then move it later on when you don't need it, when the problem is solved. It takes the police, Black and brown and colored prejudice out of it, because it's a camera that doesn't care and just looks at the license plate and the speed of the car. And so I think that type of solution could be inexpensive and way more equitable. Any kind of fines could also be arranged more equitably. And this is perhaps a solution.
Great, thank you, David. Excellent comment. And Emma, I'm going to ask if you want to just chime in and talk about where that bill ended up and why it didn't manage to get across the finish line.
Sure. Well, I don't have all the answers there, but yeah, it didn't make it out of some of the various committees. And this is actually has been considered, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago when it came up before. They've all been put forward by David Chu. So the second iteration did include a lot of new updates after working with various community members around the state to address their concerns. And I know the previous bill didn't pass was because of objections from law enforcement officers for a variety of reasons. And there has been concerns from different groups representing low-income communities about privacy, fines, like the cost of fines, which they did address in this bill, and a bunch of other issues. So yeah, I think someone just shared a blog post from Streets blog, but there's lots more to discuss on this issue.
Yep. And Emma, if someone hasn't already dropped in the chat, the most recent work by the city of Berkeley on their reimagining and working with traffic enforcement, the Vision Zero Network did a really good webinar that I highly recommend everybody watch. And so if someone could drop it in the chat, that would be wonderful. I see Dennis and Margarita. Dennis, you want to go?
Yeah, I just, in relation to the cameras and stuff, the problem is that they're not going to be everywhere. And so then you have when do they get checked, and where do they get put? And some of this stuff is really simple street design. I know the Vision Zero stuff. Folks are all over this stuff, but things like having walk signs, change 3 seconds before the light turns green. Stuff that gets cyclists and cars not to be in conflict. Works a lot better than trying to get drivers to be good drivers, because that's not going to happen.
Thanks, Dennis. Margarita.
Thank you. Well, this is a very good topic to discuss how a policy that has some positive sides from some people can have negative impacts in other people. As a Latina, I have to say that if those traffic cameras are put in my neighborhood, I will feel threatened, even if I'm not speeding on my driving. Because, as you know, the problems that Latino communities face are very specific. There is a lot of people who are undocumented, and there is fear of deportation, fear of having ICE in their streets. So, as the police, right? So I feel like this is where I feel equity is about including all points of view, bringing people of color and Latinos to that discussion, asking them, how do you feel? What is the solution that will fit better? And I say education of drivers and may be impossible, but it has to be done because it's just enforcement is never the solution. It's about education and use a speaker, street design, and Charlotte, what you were saying, I think there are solutions that will prevent us to get to the enforcement and having a camera or a policeman do that job. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Marie, and then I'm going to move us on after Marie.
For the better street design, in those communities, I was thinking about your comment that you made earlier about how you went to the Black community and they were asking, like, why should we listen to these rich white people? And I wonder if they might also feel if they're rich and they may not see it as an improvement, but more as obstacles for driving if they're mostly people who drive. And how do we, I guess the question is, how do we bring people in to those decisions so that they are welcome changes, are involved in it, and it's not just other people coming in and changing their neighborhood?
Yep, absolutely. Wonderful points all around. I mean, we've all heard that there are definitely some communities out there that view bike lanes as gentrification lanes and not a signal of anything good. So yeah, wonderful. This is a great conversation. I'm going to skip the next example because we're running out of time. And I will just quickly go through SVBC's journey, how we got here. And actually it goes back to Margarita. Margarita used to work for the Hewlett Foundation, and she's now on our board. But back when she was working for the Hewlett Foundation, we approached them about, we were doing our own internal learning about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And we got to a point where we were like, oh my gosh, this is really hard. And we think we need professional help. And Margarita was like, no problem, we can give you a grant. And so she did, the Hewlett Foundation did. And that enabled SVBC to hire 2 consultants, one to work with our staff, one to work with the board. And we ran a process where we selected some values we did a lot of reading, and then we selected some values through which we would do our work. And those 2 values were cultural humility and social justice. And then we developed a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan that was ultimately vetted by the staff, board, and with member input. So before we break out into our breakout groups, I just wanted to pull in the relevant goals from our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. And I'm hoping to drop in the chat the link to our DEI plan. But these goals, there's a lot of goals that relate to our local team work, but I thought these 2 kind of were the best ones. So goal 3, build a culturally humble community of members and volunteers who reflect, and my box is in the way, who reflect diverse communities and strengthen our community accountability. Under that, we want an inclusive membership. We want to be doing some ongoing learning, and we want a membership that reflects the broader representation of our 2 counties. Goal 5 is to work in solidarity with systemically excluded communities, what we call SECs. And this language is probably a little outdated at this point, but this is the language that we used when we adopted the plan 2.5, almost 3 years ago, and when it was in development 4 years ago. So work in solidarity with systemically excluded communities and social justice organizations to build community power around bike advocacy and other shared interests. The first one here is to add 1 to 2 of our local teams in and or from systemically excluded communities. And then also local teams that reflect our communities. It's kind of repetitive to something under goal 3. Program and policy priority planning guidance from SECs, ongoing relationships with SECs and social justice organizations, and then active engagement with social justice issues that impact local communities. So that's directly from our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. Now we're going to suck you all back into rooms to discuss some of these questions. We would love for you, we're going to again break you up into groups of 4, and we'd love it if you would discuss, are there any policy issues that the local team you work with, that if they revisited that policy issue or that policy position through a DEI lens, would be viewed differently? And then a broad question here, any reaction to the goals that I just went over? And then also, is your team representative of the perspectives of the Valley? So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. And since we're running short on time, that was really good though. It was a good conversation. I'm going to say, let's go ahead and break up into our Zoom rooms again for 15 minutes. Then we'll get sucked back in here for a quick debrief before we break up into our local teams. Sound good? All right. Welcome back, friends. And I hope some people get that reference. So I hope you all had a great conversation in your breakouts, and I'm going to ask if folks can, we just have 5 minutes before we're going to break up into our local team Zoom rooms. If you want to drop in the chat the things that really struck you about the conversation you just had, please do. And then if anybody wants to raise their hand and just offer up something that they were discussing that really struck them in their in the conversation that they were just having. I see Bruce's hand up first, so I'm going to call on Bruce.
Okay, thank you. Hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, we talked about drawing people in from different populations if they're hard pressed economically, that they don't have time for this. And yet they are part of the quote unquote biking community because they're biking to gigs and things like that. They're biking because they have to out of need and not for recreation. We talked about bike shops and how we can draw from people who can function as advocates because they interact with people who are getting their bikes fixed. But if people who don't have money can't go to bike shops, they're going to fix bikes on their own. So even there can be a lack of diversity. So those are a couple of points that came up in our conversation.
Great, thank you. Awesome. I see Matt's hand up.
At the end there, we were talking about bike routes, and we find that certain people will ride on certain bike routes and not others. So one example I brought up with Palo Alto is we've got definitely a different type of
Things that always strikes me in any group over the years when we're talking about, diversity and inclusion is when we use the language talking about bringing people in to us, that there is sort of an assumption that, we are the thing and we want people to come join us in doing what we're doing. And what we have to do before we can do that is we have to go out. Right? We have to go to other people's stuff and go to their places and go to their events and be there and not immediately start talking about, okay, come join us, but shut up and participate and listen, because that's how we get to know people, right? And find out what's going on and not even talk about adding people into our stuff until we have a relationship with them.
Excellent, excellent point. I just submitted a grant application to the San Francisco Foundation where I said exactly that. They said, what is your strategy? And it was just to be present, to be present in other communities. All right, so with that, we are right at 6 o'clock, right on time. I'm going to ask that staff goes ahead and works their magic about setting up the rooms. The way it works, actually, I think the way it works is you can see the breakout rooms and you can choose which one you're going to go to based on the city that you're affiliated with. Is that right, Emma?
Yes.
All right, so go ahead and click into the breakout rooms that you want to be in. And thank you all again for being here tonight and joining in on this really great conversation. Feel free to pepper staff with questions, email us, and let's continue the conversation.